You will not defy this family. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Your grandfather built this legacy. You will respect it.
Get that child off my father's chair before I call security. When Harrison Caldwell, the patriarch of one of Greenwich's most powerful real estate dynasties, dies, without warning, his family gathers to divide what they are certain is already theirs. Clara Santos, the young maid who spent 2 years quietly raising her toddler son Eli inside the walls of the Caldwell estate, has no intention of fighting for anything. She plans to pack her bags and disappear before the lawyers finish talking. But Harrison left behind a document no one in that room was prepared for. And the little boy everyone laughed at for climbing into the wrong chair is about to become the only person in the family who sits in the right one. The wrong side of the table. The morning after they buried Harrison Caldwell, the house still smelled like his cologne. Clara Santos noticed it the moment she came downstairs at 6:30, before anyone else in the household was awake, before the caterers arrived with their silver trays, and before the black town cars began lining the circular driveway. It was a cedar and leather scent, the kind that clung to old wood and heavy drapes, and it hit her somewhere just below the sternum as she pushed open the kitchen door and set Eli down on the tile floor. She stood still for a moment, with her hand on the doorframe, breathing through it, letting it pass, the way you let a wave pass when you know fighting it will only pull you under. Eli, unbothered by grief or the weight of large houses, immediately went for the cabinet under the sink where she kept his collection of mismatched plastic containers. He had a system she had never fully understood, some toddler logic involving stacking and unstacking that occupied him for 20 minutes at a stretch, and she was grateful for it. She moved to the stove, filled the kettle, and told herself for the 4th time since midnight that she had made the right decision. After the reading this afternoon, she would go upstairs, finish what she had started packing 3 nights ago, and leave, quietly, without making it anyone's problem. That was the thing about working in a house like this. For 2 years you learned exactly how much space you were permitted to take up. The answer in the Caldwell household was very little. She was scrambling eggs when she heard the footsteps. Not the soft shuffle of Rosario, the older housekeeper who moved through the house like water finding its level, but the hard, deliberate click of dress shoes on marble. Too early for family. She turned and found Marcus Webb standing in the kitchen doorway, his suit jacket already on, his silver hair combed flat, a leather briefcase in his right hand that looked like it had been with him for 30 years and intended to stay for 30 more. He was Harrison's personal attorney, not the firm that handled Caldwell Group business. Harrison had always kept those two things carefully separate, which was one of the many things about the man Clara had filed away and never examined too closely. "I didn't know you'd be here this early," she said, because it was the only neutral thing she could think of. "I always arrive early," Marcus said. He looked at Eli, who had abandoned the cabinet and was now attempting to fit a colander on his head. The look lasted 2 full seconds longer than a polite glance required. Not pity, not the particular discomfort wealthy people sometimes displayed when forced to acknowledge that children of uncertain status existed in rooms they considered theirs. Something else. Recognition, maybe? Though Clara dismissed the thought before it could settle. "I'll be in the study," he said. "Don't let anyone know I'm here yet." She almost asked why. Instead, she nodded, and he disappeared back into the house, his footsteps receding toward the east wing, where Harrison's private study sat behind a door that had been locked since the morning they found him at the bottom of the stairs. The eggs finished, she plated them, cut Eli's portion into pieces small enough, and sat down at the small table in the corner of the kitchen that had always been hers. Not assigned, not stated, simply understood. This was where the staff ate. The dining room, with its 12-foot ceilings and the long mahogany table that could seat 18, was not for her. It had never been for her, and she had never wanted it to be. She had been in this house long enough to know its architecture of belonging. There were rooms you entered freely, and rooms you entered only to clean. There were conversations you were part of, and conversations that stopped when you walked in. She had learned to navigate all of it without resentment, because resentment required a belief that things should have been different, And Clara Santos had stopped believing in should a long time before she ever set foot in Greenwich, Connecticut. Eli finished his eggs in 4 bites and immediately became interested in leaving the kitchen. "Stay here, baby," she said. He looked at her with Harrison's eyes. She had stopped flinching at that about 6 months ago, and said with the absolute conviction of a 2.5-year-old who has never been told no by a piece of furniture, "Go. We're going to go later, after breakfast. Go now. Eli." But he was already sliding off his chair, and she was already too tired and too hollowed out from 3 nights of almost no sleep to catch him before he hit the floor, running bare feet slapping against the tile, and she followed him through the swinging door and into the corridor, and then inevitably into the formal dining room, because that was where he always went when left to his own devices, because that was the room with the big windows and the morning light, and the chair. Harrison's chair. It sat at the head of the table, taller than the others, dark walnut, with a carved back that Eli had been fascinated by since the moment he was old enough to notice it. Clara had never known why. Maybe it was the height. Maybe it was the way the morning light came in from the east-facing windows and hit the back of it at this hour, making it glow the color of old honey. Maybe. And this was the thought she liked least. It was something more than that. Something she had no language for and no desire to examine. He climbed it with the total physical confidence of a child who has not yet learned to be afraid of falling. 1 foot on the crossbar, both hands on the armrests, and then he was up, settling himself into the seat with a solemnity that would have been funny if Clara's heart had not been in her throat. She was halfway across the room to lift him down when the door opened. Dominic Caldwell came in first. He was 61, broader than Harrison had been, with the particular kind of handsomeness that wealth maintains past its natural expiration date. His wife, Sylvia, followed 2 steps behind, in a black dress that had been pressed with military precision. Behind them came Nate Dominic's son, 28, and carrying his inheritance like a blazer he hadn't grown into yet. And then 3 or 4 others, cousins, a family friend, a woman Clara recognized as the Caldwell Group's chief operating officer, all of them talking in the low, controlled tones of people who have moved past grief and into the logistics of what comes after. They stopped when they saw Eli. The silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then Nate laughed a short, surprised sound, not cruel exactly, but not kind either. The laugh of someone who finds a situation absurd rather than a person funny, which amounts to the same thing when you are the parent of the person involved. "Is that the—" someone started. "Get that child off my father's chair before I call security," Dominic said. His voice was even, controlled. The voice of a man who had spent 60 years being obeyed in rooms like this one, and expected no different today. Clara was already moving. "I'm sorry," she said, reaching for Eli. "He got away from me. I'm sorry." Clara. Dominic said her name the way you say the name of a piece of furniture that has been moved to the wrong room. Informative, not unkind, requiring relocation. "After the reading this afternoon, I'll need to speak with you about your departure timeline. But for now, please take him somewhere appropriate." Eli did not want to be taken somewhere appropriate. He gripped the armrests with both hands, his small knuckles whitening, and looked at Dominic Caldwell with an expression that Clara recognized as pure, uncomplicated stubbornness. The kind of stubbornness that had no idea it had anything to be stubborn about, that was simply anchored in place for reasons that required no justification. "He's just a child," Sylvia said, not unkindly. The room's pressure dropped 2 degrees. "He's sitting in my father's chair," Dominic said, as if this were a logical conclusion Sylvia had somehow failed to reach. Clara got her hands under Eli's arms and lifted him free of the chair. He made the sound he always made when something he wanted was being taken from him. Not a cry, exactly, more of a sustained vocalization of objection, mouth open, eyebrows down. And she held him against her chest and said quietly into his hair, "Okay, we're going." She turned toward the door without looking at anyone in the room except for one involuntary second Marcus Webb, who had appeared in the doorway at some point during the exchange and was now standing with his briefcase at his side, watching. His face gave nothing away, but he did not look away from Eli until Clara carried the boy out of the room and the door swung shut behind her. She went back to the kitchen, sat Eli on the counter, and held his face in both hands until he stopped objecting. His cheeks were warm. His eyes, when they finally settled on hers, were very calm, the way they always got after a storm, as if the objection had been entirely reasonable, and its conclusion entirely acceptable, and life would now proceed without grievance. "You can't sit there," she told him. He considered this. Why? She had been a maid in this house for 2 years. She had mopped floors and changed sheets and polished the silver candlesticks in the dining room. She had cooked breakfast for a man who occasionally, when the house was quiet and the light was right, sat at the kitchen table and talked to her about things that had nothing to do with floors or silver. She had made a person with that man, a whole person, with his eyes and her stubbornness and his hands that were right now opening and closing around her thumbs with the focused interest of someone doing important work. "Because some chairs," she said carefully, "belong to other people." Eli looked at her with an expression she could not fully interpret. Then he said, "Okay," and went back to the colander. She stood at the kitchen counter for a long moment, looking at nothing. Then she went upstairs to pack. Her room was on the 3rd floor, at the end of the hall, past the linen closet, a room with one window that faced the garden and a ceiling that sloped on the left side where the roof came down. It was small, but it was hers. The one space in this house where the architecture of belonging shifted slightly in her favor. She had a bed, a dresser, a crib she had assembled herself from a box Harrison had ordered delivered without comment the week she told him she was keeping the baby, and a narrow shelf she had put up crookedly herself because she had never learned to use a level. The suitcase was open on the bed, half filled with the things she had started packing 3 nights ago, and then stopped, not from hope, but from exhaustion. She added 2 more sweaters, Eli's extra shoes, the photo she kept on the dresser, her mother, her 2 sisters, a beach in Florida that none of them lived near but visited once when Clara was 11, and the world was still comprehensible. She took the photo from its frame, folded it carefully, and put it in the outside pocket where she wouldn't have to search for it. She was reaching for the stack of Eli's books on the shelf when she saw the envelope. It was on the floor behind the door, which meant someone had slipped it under while she was downstairs. Plain white, no name on the front. But she recognized the handwriting immediately. Strong, right-leaning, the letters made by someone who had learned to write before keyboards existed. She had seen it on grocery lists, on notes left on the kitchen counter about appointment times and locking the back gate. Harrison's handwriting. She picked it up slowly, the way you pick up something fragile you don't quite believe is real. The envelope had not been sealed. Inside was a single card, cream-colored, the kind you find in a box of 12 and use for nothing in particular. On it, in the same strong hand, were 4 lines. "Clara, I know you won't ask. I know you'll leave before anyone can tell you to. That's why I made sure you don't have to. Trust Marcus. Don't go before the reading." She read it 3 times. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed with the card in her hands and stayed there for a long time, while Eli downstairs continued his important work with the colander, and the house filled slowly with people who had already decided how this day was going to end. She did not finish packing. She set the half-filled suitcase on the floor, card still in her hand, and looked at the wall where the shelf she had put up crookedly still held its uneven row of board books slightly tilted, stubbornly staying up anyway. Don't go before the reading. She folded the card back into its envelope and put it in the pocket of her cardigan, and she went back downstairs to find her son. Rosario was in the kitchen when Clara came back down, standing at the stove, with the efficient purposefulness of a woman who had cooked for this family through 3 generations of crises and knew that feeding people was the most honest response to catastrophe. She was 70, or close to it, with gray hair pulled back in the same braid she had worn every day for as long as Clara had known her, and hands that moved through a kitchen the way water moves through a familiar riverbed, without hesitation, without wasted motion. "Eli's in the pantry," Rosario said without turning around. He found the dried pasta. Clara went to the pantry door, cracked it open, and confirmed that, yes, her son had discovered a box of rigatoni and was methodically transferring individual pieces to a ceramic mixing bowl with a focus and gravity that suggested this was the work of his life. She pulled the door mostly closed and leaned against the counter. "Rosario," she said, "did you know Harrison was going to do something before he—" She stopped. The words "before he died" still snagged somewhere in her chest, still required a moment's negotiation before they would come out. Before. Rosario was quiet for a moment, stirring something with a wooden spoon. The kitchen smelled of onions and coffee and something sweet underneath the particular combination of smells that had meant mourning in this house for 20 years. Harrison was a man who did things in his own order, Rosario said. He didn't like to be rushed. She paused. He loved that boy. Not the way people say they love children they have no intention of being responsible for. The other kind. "He never told me," Clara said. "He never said, I don't know what he planned or what he didn't plan. He never said." "No," Rosario agreed. "He wouldn't have. Not until he was ready. And he didn't get ready in time." She turned from the stove just slightly enough to look at Clara over her shoulder. Her expression was the expression of someone choosing exactly how much of what she knows to give away, and deciding on a careful, partial measure. "Did you find the card?" Clara went very still. "You knew about the card." "I slipped it under your door this morning. He gave it to me 6 weeks ago." Rosario turned back to the stove. "He said if something happened to him before he got the chance to tell you himself, I should make sure you got it before the reading." 6 weeks ago, Clara repeated. "He was not a spontaneous man," Rosario said with what might have been the ghost of affection. "He planned everything, sometimes too carefully, sometimes not carefully enough about the things that mattered most." She set the spoon on the rest beside the burner and turned to face Clara fully. "Are you going to stay for the reading?" "I don't know what I'm staying for." "Yes, you do." Rosario said it without drama, without softness, with the flat certainty of a woman who has watched enough of life to know when someone is arguing with a conclusion they have already reached. "You're staying because he asked you to, and because that boy in the pantry deserves to have his mother in the room when it happens." "When what happens?" Rosario picked up the wooden spoon again. "You'll see." Clara stood in the kitchen for another long moment, listening to the sound of rigatoni being transferred piece by careful piece from a box to a bowl in the pantry, and the murmur of voices from the rooms beyond, the Caldwell family assembling itself for a day it had decided was already settled, and somewhere in the East Wing, the soft sounds of a man going through papers he had been trusted to keep. She reached into her cardigan pocket and touched the edge of the envelope. "Trust Marcus. Don't go before the reading." She had not trusted anyone in a very long time. Not since before Eli. Not since the year before this one, when trust had been the precise mechanism by which she had been broken. When a different man, in a different house, had smiled at her, with everything he intended to take, and nothing he intended to give. She had rebuilt herself slowly, the way you rebuild after something structural gives way, reinforcing the foundation before you attempt anything above the ground floor, making sure each new piece was load-bearing before you added the next. Harrison had been different. She had not trusted him. Deliberately, trust with him had crept in sideways through small things, through the way he handed Eli back to her after holding him carefully with both hands, the way you return something you understand to be precious, through the way he never talked about them as a problem to be solved, through the way he had once on a Tuesday evening in October, when Eli was asleep and the house was very quiet, sat across from her at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and said without preamble that he had made a lot of mistakes in his life and intended to stop making them. And she had not asked what he meant, and he had not explained, and they had sat there until the coffee was cold, and it had felt for that hour like enough. She had not expected to lose him in March. She had not let herself expect anything at all, because expecting was a form of trust, and she was still learning how far that extended. The pantry door opened, and Eli emerged carrying the mixing bowl, with both hands very seriously rigatoni jangling around inside it. "Bowl," he informed her. "Yes," she agreed. "That is a bowl." He carried it to the kitchen table and set it down with enormous care, and then looked up at her with an expression of complete satisfaction. The morning light came through the window above the sink and caught his face full on. And there was Harrison, in the set of his jaw and the width of his forehead, plain as print, unmistakable to anyone who had ever looked. She had spent 2 years telling herself that resemblance meant nothing. Biology was not destiny. A dead man's jaw on a living child's face did not create obligation, did not generate belonging, did not mean the chair at the head of the table was anything other than carved wood with a dead man's memory attached. She looked at her son's face in the morning light and thought about what Rosario had said. He loved that boy. Not the way people say they love children they have no intention of being responsible for. The other kind. The card in her pocket was warm from being held. She pulled a chair out from the kitchen table, the small table in the corner, the right table, the table that was hers, and sat down and pulled Eli up into her lap, and waited for afternoon. Across the house and the formal dining room, she could hear the family moving around chairs, pulling out voices layering over one another. The sound of a world sorting itself into a shape it had already decided on. She heard Dominic's voice carrying easily through walls, the way authority always does, talking about timelines and the firm and the Q3 projections, talking about the future of Caldwell Group, as if the conversation were already over and the answers already written. Maybe they were. She did not know what was in the Dichuk. She did not know what Harrison had done or not done, what he had meant or had not meant, what the card in her pocket was preparing her for, or whether preparation was even the right word for what she was doing. She only knew that a man she had quietly, carefully loved had asked her to stay, and that her son was warm and heavy and real in her lap, and that the pasta in the bowl was the most important thing in the world to at least one person in this room. She would stay for the reading. After that, she would decide. The morning pressed on. Cars arrived. Black clothes filled the hallways. People spoke to each other in the particular register of those discussing serious matters, while carefully not discussing the most serious matter of all, which was not the money, not the company, not the property, which was a question no one in the formal dining room had thought to ask yet, because no one in the formal dining room had spent 2 years watching Harrison Caldwell hold a child with both hands, like something he understood to be precious. Clara held her son and waited. And outside the east wing windows, the garden that Harrison had designed himself 20 years ago moved in the March wind. The bare branches of the oak trees reaching toward a sky the color of cold water. Patient, the way old trees are patient, certain of something that takes a long time to come. What the maid was never supposed to hear. She changed Eli into clean clothes at noon. Dark navy, which was what she had. Not because she thought anyone expected her to dress the toddler in morning colors, but because it was what came to hand first, and her mind was doing too many things at once to choose by color. She combed his hair flat with water, which he tolerated for approximately 4 seconds before shaking his head and undoing it, and she let it go. Because some battles exist only to remind you that you are not actually in control of anything. The house had filled up by then. She counted 3 people she recognized from the Caldwell Group offices. 2 she vaguely knew as cousins from Dominic's side. 1 woman in her 60s who had been introduced to Clara exactly once, 2 years ago, as someone very important, whose name Clara had immediately lost. They moved through the main rooms with the comfortable authority of people who have been in expensive spaces their entire lives, and expect those spaces to keep being expensive in their vicinity indefinitely. Clara kept to the kitchen and the 3rd floor with Eli, until she could no longer plausibly stay there. She was crossing the second-floor landing with Eli on her hip at 1:30, heading for the back stairs, when she heard it. Not the ordinary soundtrack of the house guests' voices, footsteps, the occasional ring of a phone being silenced, but something quieter, closer, coming from behind the door of the small sitting room that Harrison had used as a secondary office when the formal study felt too formal. The door was 3 inches open. She slowed without meaning to. "Entirely handled," a voice said. Low male clipped. "Not Dominic. Someone with Dominic, though." "You're confident about the signature?" Dominic's voice now more recognizable. "Entirely confident. He signed it. We had 3 witnesses. There's no version of this that gets challenged successfully." A pause. Then Dominic, and his voice in this moment was different from the voice he had used in the dining room that morning. Less the tone of authority, more the tone of a man checking the locks on something before he goes to sleep. "And the Santos situation." Another pause. Clara stopped moving completely. "Not an issue," the other voice said. "She has no standing. The child has no standing. The old will didn't reference either of them. The new one won't either. She'll take whatever she's offered and be grateful." "I'm not offering anything," Dominic said. "I want her gone before the new year." "She'll be gone." Clara stood on the landing, Eli heavy and warm against her side, and listened to the last few seconds of the conversation wind down into the sound of something being poured a drink or water, or the sound of men who have decided something concluding their deciding. Then the voices lowered below the threshold she could parse through a 3-inch door crack, and she moved quietly away and down the back stairs before anyone opened the door and saw her. The old will, the new one. She went back to the kitchen, set Eli on the floor, and stood at the sink, running cold water over her wrists for 30 seconds, which was a thing she did when she needed to slow her pulse and could not run or sit outside or do any of the other things that worked better. The water was very cold. March in Connecticut. She'll take whatever she's offered and be grateful. She was not angry, exactly. Anger required surprise, and she was not surprised. She had spent 2 years being so careful not to become a story in this house, not the maid who overstepped, not the woman who expected, not the cautionary tale people told about what happened when you got ideas above your station. She had been so careful. And still, here was her name in someone else's mouth, on the wrong side of a door, spoken the way you speak about a problem that is already solved. The child has no standing. Eli was attempting to open the refrigerator. He could reach the handle if he stretched on his toes, but the door was too heavy for him, so he stood there stretching and grunting, his entire being committed to this project, completely unaware that 2 rooms away, a man who had never met him had just finished explaining why he did not exist in any legally meaningful sense. "What do you want?" Clara asked him. "Juice," he said without looking at her. She opened the refrigerator and got the juice, and he received it with the solemnity of a person who has achieved exactly what they set out to achieve and found the world orderly and good. She was still holding the refrigerator door when Rosario came in from the back garden, bringing a breath of cold air and the smell of damp earth with her. "The lawyer is here," Rosario said. "Marcus. He was here this morning. Not that lawyer." Rosario set down the basket she was carrying. Garden shears, a handful of something cut, the gloves she always wore outside. "The other one, Dominic's. He arrived about an hour ago. I saw them in the small sitting room." "I know," Clara said. Rosario looked at her. Something about the way Clara said it, too flat, too still, moved across the old woman's face like weather. "What did you hear?" "Enough." Clara closed the refrigerator. "They said the will is handled, that Eli has no standing, that I'll take whatever I'm offered and be grateful." Rosario was quiet for a moment, setting the garden shears on the counter, her movements deliberate and slow, the way they got when she was choosing not to react before she was ready. "Rosario," Clara said, "tell me what you know." "I know what I know," Rosario said carefully. "And I know you're not a person who makes demands, Clara. You never have been. It's kept you safe and it's cost you things. Today I need you to decide which of those you're more concerned about." She turned to face her fully. The kitchen was very quiet, except for Eli, who was sitting on the floor now, juice box in hand, watching them both with the alert watchfulness of a child who understands that something important is being said, even when he doesn't have the words for it. Harrison called me into his study 6 weeks before he died. He said there were things he was putting in order. He said he was doing it the right way, through the right channels, because he didn't want it ever to be questioned. She paused. "He asked me if I thought you would fight for Eli if you had to." Clara felt something shift in her chest. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know," Rosario said. "I told him I thought you would do anything to protect Eli, and almost nothing to protect yourself. And those two things were going to be the problem, because the people who would come after him would know the difference." She looked at Clara steadily, the look of a woman who has earned the right to speak plainly. "He laughed when I said it. He said, 'That's why I'm making sure she doesn't have to choose.'" Clara sat down at the kitchen table because her legs had decided this was the appropriate time to stop performing their function without comment. "What did he do?" she asked. "I don't know the specifics," Rosario said. "I know he met with Marcus Webb more than once in the last 2 months. I know he came back from one of those meetings in a mood I'd never seen on him before. Not angry, not sad. Settled. Like something had been decided." She sat down across from Clara. "The card I gave you this morning, he wrote that himself. He gave it to me sealed and told me to give it to you if something happened to him before he had the chance to talk to you himself." She looked at Clara's cardigan pocket, where the edge of the envelope was just visible. "He said you'd try to leave. He said you'd pack your bags and be down the driveway before sunup if he wasn't there to stop you." "He knew me," Clara said. The words came out with more weight than she intended. "He did," Rosario said. "Better than you let him." They sat in the kitchen while the house moved around them. Footsteps above, voices in adjacent rooms, the particular orchestrated chaos of an estate preparing to legally change hands. Eli finished his juice and began carefully deconstructing it, pulling the straw out, examining the straw, putting the straw back. "Rosario," Clara said, "if what he planned, if something actually changes because of what he did—" She stopped, tried again. "I don't want them to think I was waiting for this. I don't want to be the story where the maid got her hands on the inheritance." "I know," Rosario said. "That's not who I am. I know that too." Rosario's voice was gentle but unsparing. "It doesn't matter what you want them to think, Clara. What matters is what's true and what's legal, and what that boy in front of you deserves. Those 3 things don't negotiate with what makes you comfortable." She stood, picking up the garden shears, returning them to the drawer, with the practiced efficiency of 20 years of knowing where everything in this kitchen went. "The reading is at 3. Go upstairs, get yourself and Eli ready, and be in that room." "Dominic will say I have no business being there." "Then let him say it." Rosario opened a drawer, closed it, opened another. The ordinary business of a kitchen on a difficult day. "Marcus Webb is going to be there, and Harrison's wishes are going to be in that room whether Dominic likes them or not." She paused at the drawer without looking up. "Harrison asked me, when he gave me that card, if I thought you were brave enough. I told him I didn't know about brave, but I thought you were stubborn enough, which was better." She finally looked up. "Don't make me wrong about that." Clara looked at her son, who was now lying flat on the kitchen floor on his back, looking at the ceiling with an expression of pure philosophical calm, as if the ceiling contained answers he was in no hurry to receive. She thought about 2 years in this house, about the way the architecture of belonging had been explained to her, slowly and without words, the rooms she could enter, and the rooms she entered only to clean the chairs that were hers and the chairs that were not. She thought about a man with Harrison's eyes looking at a ceiling with Harrison's particular quality of stillness. She thought about a card in her pocket, and 4 lines in a hand she recognized, and what it meant that a man had known her well enough to know she would need to be asked twice. "What time is it?" she asked. 1:40, Rosario said. "I'm going to change," Clara said. She stood, picking Eli up from the floor, hoisting him onto her hip. He went easily, cooperative, his hand finding its usual spot on her shoulder. "And I'm going to be in that room at 3. Rosario nodded the smallest of nods, the kind that contains everything and expresses nothing. Clara crossed the kitchen. At the door, she paused without quite turning around. "He didn't tell me," she said. "Whatever he planned, he never told me. I need you to know that. I need someone in this house to know that I had no idea."
"I know," Rosario said. "That's exactly why it's going to work."
Clara carried Eli upstairs, and she did not let herself think too carefully about what that meant. She changed into the dark gray dress she had brought as her one appropriate for a funeral garment, a dress she had bought 3 years ago for a cousin's wake and never expected to wear in a house like this one. She washed her face, pulled her hair back, put on the small gold earrings her mother had given her when she turned 22. She looked at herself in the narrow mirror above the dresser and thought that she looked like exactly what she was, a young woman who worked in other people's houses and was trying very hard to look like she belonged in a room she was about to walk into, and did not quite succeed at looking like she believed it. That would have to be enough. She dressed Eli in the Navy outfit again, recombed his hair with water, achieved approximately 3 seconds of cooperation before he shook it loose and decided it didn't matter. She took the card from her cardigan pocket and transferred it to the small wristlet she used when she needed her hands free. She gave Eli his blue stuffed rabbit, which was the object most likely to keep him quietly occupied for a sustained period. At 2:55, she carried him downstairs, walked through the kitchen, nodded at Rosario, who was still at the stove, and crossed the long corridor toward the front of the house and the formal dining room where the reading was set to begin. She heard Dominic's voice through the door, loud with the easy volume of a man in his own space. She heard other voices under it, the rustling of papers, the sound of chairs. She stood outside the door for 3 seconds with her son on her hip and her dead employer's handwriting in her wristlet, and a housekeeper's words in her ears, and she thought about all the rooms she had entered only to clean. Then she opened the door. Everyone has already decided. The room went quiet when she walked in. Not silent, there were still papers shuffling and someone's phone vibrating against the table, and the ambient sound of a large gathering trying to look like it had gathered for something other than money. But the quality of the noise changed when she appeared in the doorway, the way a room changes when a draft comes in from somewhere unexpected. Heads turned, eyes adjusted. The recalibration was quick, professional, the kind of social reaction that wealthy people have refined to the point where it almost doesn't look like a reaction at all. Almost. There were 14 people around the table. Clara counted automatically, the habit of a woman who has spent years assessing rooms before entering them. Dominic at the head Harrison's chair, she noticed the one Eli had been removed from this morning. Sylvia to his left, Nate to his right. Then cousins, associates, the COO, the family friend. And at the far end of the table, positioned slightly apart from the others, in the way of someone who is present but not quite participating, Marcus Webb. His briefcase on the floor beside his chair, his hands flat on the table in front of him, his eyes on the door. On her. On Eli, who had found a loose thread on his rabbit's ear and was occupying himself with its systematic investigation. There was a chair against the wall near the door, not at the table but facing it. The chair that had always been understood as the seat for household staff when staff were required to be present for formal events. Clara had sat in it twice before, both times for insurance matters that had required her witness signature. She moved toward it now, and it was Dominic who spoke. "Clara," he said. The same tone as this morning. Furniture that has been moved to the wrong room. "This is a family reading. You understand. Mr. Harrison's attorney asked me to be present," she said. She had not exactly been asked. The card had said, "Don't go before the reading," and Rosario had said, "Be in that room," and she was translating both of those into something that sounded like authorization, because it was the only language she had available. A ripple around the table. Not quite a sound, more of a vibration. "Marcus," Dominic said, turning toward the far end of the table. Marcus Webb was quiet for a moment, His hands were still flat on the table. His expression was the expression of a man who has decided exactly when he is going to do what he is going to do, and that moment has not yet arrived. "It would be best to have all parties present for the reading," he said, "as a matter of procedural completeness." He did not look at Dominic when he said it. He looked at Clara. "Please, sit down, Clara." She sat down in the chair against the wall. Eli, sensing the stillness of the room, looked up from his rabbit and surveyed the faces around the table with the unpanicked curiosity of a child for whom large groups of strangers have not yet become threatening. His gaze landed on Dominic and stayed there for a moment, with the unblinking thoroughness of toddler assessment. Dominic looked away first. "All right," said Raymond Holt, who Clara recognized as the Caldwell family's estate attorney, not Marcus, who was Harrison's personal attorney. Raymond had handled the family's estate matters for 30 years and was the one who had the prepared documents in front of him. He was 70, careful with the practiced neutrality of someone who has presided over more than one family at war with itself. "Let's proceed." The will Raymond read was thorough, precise, and exactly what everyone in the room had expected it to be. It distributed the Caldwell estate as follows: the Greenwich property to Dominic as the surviving sibling and head of the family, with rights of succession to Nate upon Dominic's death. 30% of Caldwell Group shares divided equally among the family members present. The charitable trust in Eleanor Caldwell's name, Harrison's late wife, to be continued at full funding for another 20 years. Various personal effects and specific bequests to specific people. The language was formal and complete, and Raymond read every word of it without inflection, which was Clara had come to understand what professionalism sounded like in rooms like this one. She sat against the wall and listened to Harrison's estate being divided like a map, its territories apportioned without ambiguity. There was no mention of Eli. There was no mention of Clara. The will Raymond Holt read did not contain them, did not recognize them, did not acknowledge that they had ever been in the same rooms as Harrison Caldwell, eaten breakfast at his kitchen table, sat in his chair in the morning light. She had known this was the most likely outcome. She had known it since she first heard Dominic's voice through the sitting room door. And still, hearing the formal language move past her and her son without a word, she felt something in her chest go very quiet, the way a room goes quiet after a sound you were bracing for finally arrives. Eli had fallen asleep. She had not noticed it happening. He had been awake, then he was not. The way small children fall asleep without ceremony when they decide they are done with being awake. He was curled against her side, rabbit tucked under his chin, his breathing slow and even, and deeply indifferent to everything in the room. She held him and waited for Raymond Holt to finish. When he did, there was a brief silence, the silence of a room that has just heard what it expected to hear and is now shifting into the next phase, which was celebration, or at least satisfaction, the particular satisfaction of having been correct. And then Dominic spoke. "Thank you, Raymond." He sat back in Harrison's chair with the ease of a man settling into something he has been waiting to settle into for a long time. "I want to acknowledge that this transition is going to require all of us to be very intentional about maintaining what Harrison built. Caldwell Group is—" "Before we proceed to any discussion," said a voice, "I need to raise a matter of procedure." Marcus Webb. He had not raised his voice. He had barely changed his posture. But the room stopped the way rooms stop when someone who has been very still suddenly moves, the abrupt awareness of a presence that had been there all along. "Marcus," Raymond said in the tone of two professionals with a shared history of operating in the same rarefied air. "This reading has concluded. A document has been read," Marcus said. "I would like to clarify that it was not the final document." The temperature of the room dropped. Not metaphorically. Clara felt it as a physical thing, a collective shift in the atmosphere, the way a storm changes the air pressure before it arrives. Dominic was very still. "What did you say?" "Harrison Caldwell revised his will," Marcus said. "The revision was executed 22 days before his death. It was properly witnessed, notarized, and submitted for certification through my office. It supersedes all prior documents. He reached down, unhurried, and lifted his briefcase onto the table. He set it flat, opened it, and removed a cream-colored folder that was thicker than what Raymond had read from. He set the folder on the table in front of him. He looked at Raymond Holt with something that was not quite an apology, and not quite a challenge, but contained elements of both. I was retained by Harrison personally for this purpose. The instructions were specific to read the revised document only in the presence of the full family. That condition has been met. You're saying there's a second will, Nate said. He was 28 and trying to sound like it. I'm saying there is the will, Marcus said. The document that was just read is a prior draft. It was revoked when the revision was signed. Dominic had not moved. He was looking at Marcus Webb with an expression that Clara could not fully read from across the room. Something behind controlled stillness. Something that looked less like surprise than like a calculation that had just encountered an unexpected variable. This is highly irregular, Dominic said. It is entirely regular, Marcus said. He opened the folder. Nate reached for his phone under the table. Sylvia put her hand on Dominic's arm. The COO was very still. Raymond Holt had the expression of a man watching a professional situation develop in a direction he did not foresee, and was deciding in real time how to position himself relative to whatever came next. Clara held her sleeping son and did not move. Marcus began to read. The revised document was also thorough and precise, and written in the language of finality. It began with the same bequests as the first, the property to Dominic, personal effects to their designated recipients. The charitable trust continued. Clara registered these things with the part of her mind that was tracking the room, waiting for the variable, for the thing that Marcus had needed an entire briefcase to say. Then Marcus said, "To Eli Santos Caldwell, my son, whom I hereby acknowledge as my biological and legal heir." The room did not go quiet. The room exploded into sound. Sylvia's chair scraped back. Someone at the far end of the table said, "What?" in a voice pitched just above conversation. Dominic's hand came down flat on the mahogany in a sound that was neither a knock nor a slam, but something precise and controlled, the sound of a man reminding the room who was in charge of it. "Stop," Dominic said. His voice cut through the noise the way a closed fist cuts through water. Not loudly, but totally. "Stop. Marcus, this is fraudulent. That is not a legitimate document. It is certified and notarized, and Harrison was not of sound mind in the weeks before his death," Dominic said. "Anyone who knew him can see that. We will have this document challenged in probate before the month is out." "Dominic." Marcus's voice was flat and even and entirely unmoved. "I met with Harrison Caldwell 17 days before he died. He was entirely lucid. We went through every clause of this revision together. He read it aloud to me before signing it, which is a practice I require for documents of this significance. And his reading was precise, and his comprehension was complete. I will testify to this in any court in the state of Connecticut." He looked at Dominic across the table. "I would advise you to allow me to finish." The room was the kind of quiet that exists in the absence of motion rather than the absence of sound. Marcus read on. 51% of Caldwell Group shares to Eli Santos Caldwell, to be held in trust until his 25th birthday. Clara Santos named as sole legal guardian and trustee until that date, with full authority over Eli's interests and decision-making power proportional to the share percentage during the trust period. A full legal acknowledgement of paternity. A provision for Clara's housing and financial support during the trust period. The language was specific without gaps, written by someone who had known exactly which kinds of challenges would be mounted, and had built his document to withstand each of them. Furthermore, Marcus said, and this was the last section, "It is my specific instruction that this document be read in the presence of my brother Dominic, so that there should be no confusion later about what I intended. I have no anger toward my brother. I have no wish for conflict. I have only the desire, which I should have acted on sooner, to ensure that my son is known by his name, and his name is known by this family. His name is Eli Santos Caldwell. I ask that this be remembered. Marcus closed the folder. Clara became aware that people were looking at her. Half the table, at least. Some with shock, some with calculation, some with the particular blankness of those who are processing information faster than their face has been told to. Dominic was looking at the folder. Nate was looking at his father. Sylvia was looking at the table. Raymond Holt was looking at his own hands with the expression of a man who will have things to say about this later, but has elected to save them. Eli slept on his rabbit under his chin, his breathing slow and entirely unaware. Someone, the cousin at the far end, the one Clara didn't know, made a short sound that was not quite a laugh and was immediately suppressed. Nate looked at him and he stopped. "I want legal counsel," Dominic said. He said it to the room in general, to no one in particular, with the quiet lethality of a man reorganizing his forces. "You're welcome to seek it," Marcus said. "This will be challenged. That is your right. And I want this woman." Dominic's eyes moved to Clara, and there it was, the full weight of what she had seen in his face that morning, the full inventory of what she represented to him in this room, which was not a person, not a problem, but an insult. "I want her and that child to remain on the property under our supervision until this is resolved. I won't have estate assets leaving the—" "You don't have that authority," Marcus said. Under the terms of the revised document, effective as of Harrison Caldwell's death, Eli Santos Caldwell holds 51% of Caldwell Group. His guardian, Clara Santos, has all rights associated with that position. Neither of them is under your supervision. A beat. In fact, the inverse may be argued. The room sat with that for a moment. "Raymond," Dominic said, turning to the family's estate attorney. "Tell me this can be challenged." Raymond Holt was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to answer the question before he spoke. "I would need to examine the document thoroughly," he said. "I can't speak to its validity before I've done that." "It is valid," Marcus said. "I'll provide copies to all parties." He began returning the folder to his briefcase with the deliberate movements of a man who has done the thing he was here to do, and is now closing the chapter. He had not raised his voice once in the last 15 minutes. He had not needed to. Clara sat against the wall. She was holding her sleeping son, and she was looking at the mahogany table and the cream folder in the face of Dominic Caldwell as he recalculated. And she was not feeling what she had expected to feel, which was relief or victory, or the particular warmth of being vindicated in a room that has misread you. She was feeling something more like standing at the edge of a very large drop and understanding that the next step was irreversible, regardless of where it led. Eli Santos Caldwell. She had not heard those words in that order before. She said them silently in her head, testing the weight of them, the way you test the weight of a door you aren't sure is load-bearing. Someone near the end of the table pulled out a chair, and the sound of it was very loud. Dominic stood. The room stood with him instinctively. Years of conditioning in rooms where Dominic Caldwell stood and rooms became vertical. He looked at Clara for a long moment, the look of a man cataloging what has just happened and deciding where to begin dismantling it. "We'll speak later," he said to her. Not a threat in tone, a statement of fact, efficient as a calendar entry. He walked out of the room, and Sylvia followed, and then most of the table followed. Because that was how rooms like this had always worked. The center of gravity left, and the room organized itself in relation to that departure. Clara did not move. Eli stirred against her, made a small sound, resettled. His eyes did not open. She sat in the chair against the wall and looked at the table where 14 people had been, and where now only a few remained. Raymond Holt, gathering his documents, two cousins speaking to each other in low voices, and Marcus Webb, who had closed his briefcase and was now looking at her from the far end of the table. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was such a simple question for such an enormous moment that she almost could not answer it. "I don't know," she said. Marcus nodded as if this were the expected response and the correct one. "We'll need to speak, privately," There are a great many things to go over." He paused. Harrison was very thorough. He anticipated most of what will happen next. His voice was even and professional, but there was something underneath it. Not sentiment exactly, but the weight of someone who had known a person and is now carrying that person's last intentions around in a briefcase and delivering them to the right rooms at the right times, because that was what he had promised to do. "He knew he was going to die," Clara said. It came out differently than she expected. Not as an accusation, not as grief exactly, but as understanding, arriving slightly late, the way understanding always arrives. "He knew he might," Marcus said. "He was a man who took that kind of contingency seriously." He stood, picking up the briefcase. "I'll be in the study for the next hour. Come when you're ready." He paused at the chair next to her, not sitting, just pausing. "He left you a letter as well. Not in the will, personal. It's in the study." He left. Clara sat in the emptied room with her sleeping son in the chair against the wall, the chair that had always been for the staff, and looked at the long mahogany table and Harrison's chair at its head, and the windows beyond it, where the March afternoon light had gone thin and silver and cold. A letter. Personal. Not in the will. She thought about a man who planned everything and still hadn't planned enough time to tell her himself. She thought about how much of loving someone is making peace with what they did not say, and what they could not say, and what they meant underneath the silence all along. Eli's hand opened and closed once in sleep, reflexive the way small hands do reaching for something, even in dreams. She held him tighter. She did not go to the study right away. She sat in the chair against the wall in the room where the will had been read, and she let herself be still. And she let the fact of what had just happened exist in the room with her, without trying to understand it all at once, because some things were too large to understand all at once, and had to be approached the way you approach something that might startle, slowly, from the side, making sure it knew you were coming. From somewhere in the house, she heard a door close. Then silence. The house was very quiet for a long moment, as quiet as it had been on those Tuesday evenings in October. And in that quiet, she could almost feel the shape of what Harrison had left behind. Not the money, not the shares, not the legal language in the cream-colored folder. The other thing. The thing that had been in the room every time he handed Eli back to her with both hands, every time he sat across from her with cold coffee, and said things that weren't quite what he meant, but were the closest he could get to it. She had been so careful not to expect anything. And he had been quietly, without telling her, making sure she didn't have to. She stood Eli, warm and heavy and real in her arms, and she walked toward the door. Tomorrow was going to be a different kind of difficult. She could feel it the way you feel weather, not the shape of it yet, but the pressure of it building. But tonight, she was still in the house, and there was a letter with her name on it in a room at the end of the east wing. She went to find it. The document Harrison left behind. The study smelled like him. She had expected it to, and still it caught her at the door the way it had caught her in the kitchen that morning. Cedar and leather. The particular combination that had made the kitchen feel inhabited long after it should have felt only empty. She stood in the doorway for a moment with Eli on her hip, not quite able to cross the threshold. And then Eli leaned forward with the purposeful weight of a child who has identified a destination, and she moved with him, because she had always moved with him. Marcus was at the desk, which had been Harrison's desk, papers spread in front of him, his reading glasses on his briefcase open at his feet. He looked up when she came in and gestured toward the two chairs on the other side of the desk without speaking, which was a courtesy she registered, not the kind of gesture that said, "You may sit," but the kind that said, "Please sit," which was different. She sat. Eli, awake now and energized by the sustained nap, immediately became interested in a globe on a stand in the corner. She let him go to it, watching him put both hands on it and spin it slowly, frowning at the result. "I want to explain some things," Marcus said. He took his glasses off and set them on the papers in front of him. He was in his middle 60s, she thought, though she had never asked. He had the kind of face that had been deciding things for a long time and had made its peace with that. Harrison and I worked on that document over several sessions. He was, as I said, entirely lucid throughout. But there are things about his intentions that the legal language doesn't fully convey, and I think you deserve to hear them. Okay, Clara said. He did not tell you because he was afraid, Marcus said. Not afraid of you. Afraid of what telling you would mean that he was sick, that he was preparing for something, that there was a version of the future in which he wasn't in it. He thought if he told you, you would begin to leave before he was ready for you to go. He paused. He understood that was a selfish reason. He said so explicitly. She looked at her hands in her lap. He also thought, Marcus continued, that if you knew he had done this formally, legally acknowledged, Eli-arranged financial support, put everything in order, you would interpret it as obligation, as doing the right thing. He didn't want that. He wanted you to know, but he wanted you to know it from him in a way that made clear it wasn't obligation. A pause that felt heavy with something that was not quite regret. He ran out of time before he found the right way to say it. He always did that, Clara said. It came out quietly, not accusing, just true. He'd wait for the right time, until the right time was gone. Yes, Marcus said. He knew that about himself. He reached into the top drawer of the desk and produced an envelope, off-white, sealed her name in Harrison's handwriting across the front. He set it on the edge of the desk and did not push it toward her, just placed it where she could reach it when she chose. He wrote that last October. He updated the will in February. He told me he still planned to speak with you before the will ever needed to be read. He looked at her steadily. As I said, he ran out of time. She reached for the envelope. She did not open it here. She wasn't sure she could open it here in front of a man she barely knew, in a room that was still full of the smell of someone she had not yet fully grieved. She held it in both hands and looked at her name on the front for a moment, and then she put it in her wristlet with the card that had come under her door that morning. What happens now? She asked. Now, Marcus said, is the complicated part. The will is valid. I have no doubt about that, and I'm prepared to defend its validity in any proceeding Dominic pursues. But he will pursue something. He already has legal counsel here today. I recognize the attorney he brought, and that tells me he anticipated some version of this, though perhaps not the specific version that actually happened. He put his glasses back on, looked at the papers in front of him. There are several things working in Eli's favor. The document is properly executed. The paternity acknowledgement is legally sound. My testimony as the attorney who witnessed the signing and the revision process is admissible and unimpeachable. He looked up. And there is one more thing. What? The document Dominic intended to use the prior draft that Raymond Holt read today. It was not simply a prior draft, Marcus said. Harrison brought me something 6 weeks before he died. He had found in his personal files a copy of a will that did not match his own instructions, a document that had been altered. He spoke carefully, precisely, with the controlled delivery of someone describing a thing that has legal implications and must be described accurately. Certain clauses had been changed. The original language about certain business interests had been modified. The signatures were his, but the document as a whole did not reflect what he had actually signed. He believed, and I share his belief, that the document was altered after his signature was obtained. Clara was very quiet. He knew. He suspected, and he took steps. He brought me the document, I had it examined, and the examination produced findings that are significant. Marcus's voice had not changed. It had the quality of ground that holds when you stand on it, reliable, specifically because it doesn't try to be dramatic about being solid. If Dominic pursues a challenge to the will in probate court, the findings about the prior document will be part of our response, and what began as a will challenge will expand into something considerably more serious for the parties who touched that prior document. Clara looked at the globe in the corner. Eli had succeeded in making it spin continuously and was now tracking the rotation with great focus, his finger outstretched and hovering just over the surface, riding the movement without touching it.
He was protecting us, she said. From before he knew he needed to.
Yes, Marcus said. That is an accurate summary. She was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light through the east-facing windows was going amber, the particular color of late March afternoons in Connecticut, when the sun is low and the sky is clear and everything looks briefly warmer than it is. I need to know what I'm supposed to do, she said. I don't know how to be in a board meeting.
I don't know how to be a trustee. I work in other people's houses.
You worked in this house, Marcus said. That's different now. He paused. You don't have to know how to do any of it yet. That's why there are people like me. What you need to know is that you have the right to be here, that Eli's interests are legally protected, and that nothing Dominic says or does in the next 48 hours changes either of those facts. He looked at her across the desk with the steady look of someone who has decided she needs to hear this clearly and is going to make sure she hears it clearly. You are not a problem that is going to be managed. You are the legal guardian of the primary shareholder of Caldwell Group. Those are two entirely different positions. She let that sit. Eli had discovered that if he blew on the globe, it made a very satisfying sound, and was now blowing on it steadily, entirely content with this discovery, entirely unaware that he was the primary shareholder of anything.
He's going to fight this, Clara said.
Yes, Marcus said. He is. And I'm going to have to fight back. In a legal and procedural sense, yes. He paused. Though I would note that the position you are in is fundamentally a defensive one. The will is valid. The document Dominic wants to use is not. You don't need to attack. You need to stand. She thought about what Rosario had said that morning in the kitchen. Not brave enough, but stubborn enough. Which is better? She was not sure she was either. She was a 28-year-old woman who had spent 2 years in other people's rooms, being careful to take up exactly the right amount of space and no more, who had spent those same 2 years telling herself that what she felt in this house was proximity and not belonging, that what she felt for a man who handed her son back with both hands was gratitude, and not something she had no right to name. She was not sure she was brave enough or stubborn enough, but she was here, and the envelope was in her wristlet, and her son was blowing on a globe in the corner, and Harrison had spent the last months of his life making sure that when this day came, she would not have to choose between herself and Eli. He had taken the choice away from her. That was, she supposed, the last thing he had ever given her.
Okay,
she said. Tell me what comes next. Marcus opened the papers in front of him and began. He went through it methodically, the way he apparently did everything. The timeline of the probate process, the likely grounds for Dominic's challenge, the evidence they had in response, the role Clara would need to play in the immediate term and in the months following. He spoke for 40 minutes, and she listened to all of it, asking questions when she had them, which was often, because she had always been a person who listened to what she didn't understand and asked about it rather than pretending, which was one of the few habits of hers that she had never had to apologize for. By the time Marcus finished, the light through the windows had gone from amber to the flat gray-blue of early evening, and Eli had given up on the globe and migrated to a low shelf of books at the other end of the room, where he was pulling volumes out one at a time and stacking them with the purposeful inaccuracy of someone who understands the concept of a stack without understanding the center of gravity. One more thing, Marcus said. He reached into the briefcase and produced another folder, thinner than the others, and set it on the desk. Harrison also left a letter for Dominic. I am obligated to deliver it. I wanted you to know that such a letter exists, and that its contents may affect how Dominic proceeds. He paused. I haven't read it, but Harrison told me what it contained. He said it was... He paused again, choosing the word. Clarifying. What does that mean? It means, Marcus said carefully, that Harrison knew more about what had been done to his documents than he chose to reveal while he was living. He chose not to confront Dominic directly. He chose to put everything he knew into the hands of an attorney and a letter and a legal document, and to let those things speak after he was gone. A pause. I don't think he was afraid to confront his brother. I think he was tired. He'd spent a long time being tired of it. She thought of Harrison sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in October, saying, "I've made a lot of mistakes, and I intend to stop making them." And she thought she understood now what some of those mistakes were, and what it cost him to name them. He was protecting everyone at once, she said. Even Dominic. In his way, Marcus said. Yes. She stood gathering Eli from his book-stacking project, receiving his mild protest with the practiced absorption of 2.5 years of this. She held him on her hip and turned to go, and then turned back. "Marcus," she said, "did he talk about me when you were working on the documents?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Professional quiet, the kind with content behind it. "He said," Marcus said slowly, "that you were the most stubborn person he had ever met." And he said it the way people say things they consider to be unambiguously good. She nodded. She held her son, and she walked out of the study and into the corridor, and she did not look back at the cedar and leather smell, or the low amber shelf with the tilted books, or the desk where the most important things had been decided. She walked toward the kitchen, because that was where she knew how to be, and she thought about what came next, and she did not allow herself yet to feel the full weight of what was in the wristlet at her side. Not yet. The day was not done. Down the corridor she heard a door, and then she heard Dominic Caldwell's voice, and it was aimed at her. Clara. He was coming from the direction of the front hall, unhurried, his jacket off now, his sleeves rolled precisely to the elbow. Sylvia was not with him. No one was with him. "We need to speak. Now." She stopped. Eli looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at Eli for a fraction of a second with an expression she could not name, and then looked back at her. "In the sitting room," he said. "Please." The word please from Dominic Caldwell was not a word that meant please. It was a word that meant, "I'm going to be civil about this for the moment, and I need you to understand that civility is a choice I am making." She followed him into the sitting room, the same room she registered where she had heard his voice through the 3-inch door crack 4 hours ago. He closed the door. She remained standing with Eli on her hip near the door, because she had spent enough time in enough rooms to know the value of not moving too far from the exit. "I'll be direct," he said. He sat in the chair nearest the window, which was the largest chair in the room, and faced the door squarely, which she did not think was accidental. "What was presented today is going to be challenged. I have very good lawyers. This is going to take a long time and cost a great deal of money, and it's going to be extremely unpleasant for everyone involved, including you." He looked at her steadily. "Especially for you." "I understand," she said. "Do you?" He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, the posture of a man trying to shrink the space between himself and a problem without moving his feet. "You're 28 years old. You have a 2-year-old child. You have no legal background, no financial background, no experience with anything that is about to be asked of you. You will be in depositions. You will be in court. Your life, every part of it, will be examined and made available to people whose job it is to find something that makes you look like what you aren't." A pause. "I am not threatening you, Clara. I am describing a situation." "I understand," she said again. "I am prepared," he said, "to make this much simpler. For everyone." He sat back. "A substantial settlement. Trust fund for the boy. A real one, not dependent on a contested document. Funded now, guaranteed yours, to manage without any of the complications that come with a 51% share dispute that will be in the courts for years." He said a number. It was large enough that she registered it not as an amount, but as an abstraction, a number that existed in a world whose relationship to her actual life was theoretical. "In exchange, you agree not to contest the will reading. Not the first reading, Raymond's." He paused. Harrison was a generous man, but not a careful one about these things. "The document Marcus has may or may not hold up under scrutiny. The settlement I am describing holds up regardless." She looked at him. She thought about what Marcus had said. You don't need to attack, you need to stand. She thought about what Rosario had said. Stubborn enough. Which is better? She thought about a card with 4 lines in a handwriting she recognized, and a letter in her wristlet she had not yet opened, and a man at a kitchen table on a Tuesday in October who said he had made mistakes and intended to stop. Mr. Caldwell, she said, I need to ask you something. He raised an eyebrow slightly, the expression of a man who had not expected to be asked something. Did you change his will? She asked. The first one. Did you alter it? The room was very quiet. Dominic Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his face. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition of someone who has been asked the specific question they built the room to avoid. His expression did not break, but it changed in the way that something changes when a structural element shifts behind it, subtle at the surface, significant underneath. That's a very serious accusation, he said. His voice was still controlled, still the voice of a man who was choosing how much of the room's air he was going to claim. I didn't make an accusation, she said. I asked a question. Silence. Eli, who had been quiet against her side, chose this moment to say in the clear, carrying voice of a toddler who has been listening carefully and is now contributing, Man. She did not smile, but she breathed. I'll have my lawyers respond to Marcus in the morning, Dominic said. He stood. The meeting was over, in his mind. She could see him closing it, filing it, moving to the next thing. Think about what I've offered Clara. Think about it carefully. It won't be on the table indefinitely. I'll think about it, she said. She didn't mean it, and they both knew it. He opened the door for her. She walked out with Eli on her hip, and in the corridor she heard the door close behind her. And she kept walking, kept her pace even, kept her breathing steady, until she reached the back stairs where no one was watching. And then she sat down on the second step and put her free hand flat on the cold wood of the stair beside her and breathed. Eli patted her cheek with one small hand. Mama, he said, by way of nothing, by way of everything, by way of the particular toddler, understanding that contact is sometimes the most important thing. Yeah, she said. I know. She sat on the step for 3 minutes. Then she stood up, and she went to find Rosario, and she told her what Dominic had offered. And Rosario listened to all of it, and then said with the flat economy of 20 years of watching this family, He offered you money because the document Marcus has is exactly what Marcus says it is, and Dominic knows it. I know, Clara said. Are you going to take it? No, Clara said. And then, he asked me if I changed his will, Dominic. I asked him if he changed the will. And? He didn't answer, Clara said. Rosario nodded. That's its own kind of answer, she said. Clara held Eli and looked at the kitchen and the door to the garden where the dark was coming in around the edges of the frame, and she thought about tomorrow and what it was going to ask of her. She was not sure she was ready. She was not sure she would ever feel ready. But Dominic had not answered her question, and Marcus had a folder in his briefcase with findings in it, and Harrison had spent the last months of his life building something that was supposed to hold. She was going to let it hold. She was going to stand. What he left her was not the money. She did not sleep, not in the way of lying awake with her thoughts refusing to settle. She had plenty of experience with that kind of sleeplessness and had its rhythms down precisely, but in the more total way. The way where sleep never makes an honest approach at all, where the body lies flat and the mind circles the same few facts at altitude, and morning comes like a fact rather than a relief. Eli slept perfectly. He always slept perfectly. He had arrived in the world with the sleeping habits of someone who had thought this through in advance and decided against making it anyone's problem, and she had been grateful for this exact quality of his so many times that she had lost count. She lay next to him in the narrow bed with the sloping ceiling and the window that faced the garden, and she listened to the house. It was a house that had its own sounds at night. sounds he had learned over 2 years without noticing she was learning them. The particular creak of the third stair from the landing, the way the old radiators spoke in the east wing, the sound of the wind in the oak trees, which was different in March than in October, thinner, more direct, like something that had shed everything unnecessary. She did not open the letter, not that night. She held the envelope in both hands in the dark for a long time, and then put it on the dresser and made herself look at the ceiling instead. Harrison had known she would do this. He had probably known she would spend the night looking at the ceiling rather than the letter. He had known her well enough to know which kind of difficult thing she put off and which kind she went at directly, which was the particular intimacy of being truly known by someone, not just understood in the general sense, but specifically predicted your own habits, turned back to you with gentle accuracy. She was angry at him a little. A controlled, thoroughly unfair anger that she acknowledged without letting it expand. He could have told her. Not the legal details, not the documents, just the intention. He could have said in the kitchen on any one of 20 Tuesday evenings, "I am making sure your son has his name." That would have been enough. She would have known what to do with enough. Instead, he had planned a surprise he didn't live to deliver. And she had spent the night before the reading deciding to leave, and the morning watching her son get pulled out of a dead man's chair, and the afternoon listening to a legal document read her son into existence in a room full of people who had just decided he didn't exist. She was angry at him for dying in the wrong order, which was the most irrational thing she had ever been angry about, and possibly the most human. By 5 in the morning, she had resolved the anger into something smaller and more workable. Not forgiveness exactly, but the recognition that the dead do not owe us revised timelines. That people do what they can with the time they actually have, and not the time we wish they'd had. And that what Harrison had done with his time was make sure her son had his name, and that this was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything. The call from Marcus came at 8:37 the next morning. She was in the kitchen, Eli in his chair with a bowl of oatmeal he was negotiating at his own pace, Rosario at the stove and pretending she wasn't listening, the March light coming in flat and white through the garden window. She had the envelope in her cardigan pocket again. She still hadn't opened it. "Dominic filed this morning," Marcus said without preamble, which was the way he always began calls, she was realizing. "Emergency petition to the probate court to delay the certification of the revised will. He's claiming incapacity and undue influence." A pause. He also submitted a request for a forensic review of both documents. She was quiet. "Clara," Marcus said, "this is not unexpected. It's actually useful." "How is it useful?" "Because a forensic review will examine both documents," he said, "including the prior draft, including the alterations." A brief pause. "I've already spoken with our expert. He's available to submit his findings to the court as part of the review process. What Dominic is requesting is in effect a full accounting of the documentary history of Harrison's will. He thinks that works in his favor." Another pause, and in this one she heard something she had not heard before from Marcus Webb, which was satisfaction, measured and professional, but present. "He's wrong." She sat down at the kitchen table. "Tell me what I need to do," she said. "For today, nothing. I need you to remain at the property, which is your legal right as Eli's guardian and trustee, and not engage with Dominic or his counsel directly. If either of them approaches you, you refer them to me, not in a confrontational way, simply, 'Please speak with my attorney.' That's the sentence." He paused. "Can you do that?" "Yes," she said. "I know this is frightening," Marcus said. "It is," she agreed. "It won't always be," he said. "Right now it's frightening because it's new and because the outcome isn't certain. In 3 to 6 months, when the forensic findings have been admitted and Dominic's petition has been reviewed, the outcome will be more certain. These things are slow. I know slow is its own kind of difficult." "I can do slow," she said. "I've been doing slow for 2 years." A brief silence from Marcus that felt unexpectedly like warmth. "I'll be in touch this afternoon," he said. "In the meantime, please eat something. And please open the letter, Clara. He worked on it for a long time." She looked down at the pocket of her cardigan. "How do you know I haven't opened it?" "Because," Marcus said gently, "I knew Harrison. And I know you a little from what he told me. And the two of you are very similar in the way you approach things that are important to you, which is to say, carefully, slowly, and approximately 48 hours after you should have." He paused. "Open the letter." He ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the garden window and listened to Eli negotiate with his oatmeal and thought about what Marcus had said. Very similar in the way you approach things that are important. She held that for a moment, turned it over, looked at its underside. Then she got up and went upstairs to read the letter alone. She sat on the edge of the bed with the sloping ceiling and opened the envelope. Harrison's handwriting filled 3 pages, cream-colored paper, the same strong, right-leaning hand. Not a legal document, not an instruction. A letter the way letters used to be letters, before people stopped writing them, addressed to her directly, using her full name at the top, which he had almost never done in person. She read it slowly. He wrote about Eli first. He wrote about the first time he had held Eli, which Clara had not been present for. Rosario had brought the baby down one afternoon when Clara was sleeping, and Harrison had asked to hold him. And Clara had not known this until right now, reading about it in a letter on the bed in the sloping ceiling room. He wrote that he had held Eli for 20 minutes, and that Eli had looked at him with complete, unblinking seriousness, and that he had understood in those 20 minutes that he had been wrong about a great many things he had spent 60 years being certain about, and that he intended to do something about that while he still could. He wrote about the will. Not the legal details, he said Marcus would handle those, and he trusted Marcus to handle them better than he could explain them himself, but the intention behind it. He wrote that he had not told her because he was afraid that if he told her, she would leave. That her instinct was always to make herself smaller when things got complicated, to reduce her claim on any room she was in, and that he had watched her do this for 2 years and had not said enough to counter it, which was his failure, and one he regretted. He wrote that Eli deserved his name, and that Clara deserved to be in the rooms she was already in, and that neither of those things should be contingent on anyone's permission. He wrote, "I know you will try to leave before they tell you to. I know because I know you. I need you to know that you are not a problem I was managing or a situation I was navigating. You are a person I loved, who raised a person I love in the rooms of my house, which means something to me. Don't leave those rooms for anyone who tells you they were never yours to be in." She read that paragraph 3 times. The last page was shorter. He wrote that he was sorry for not telling her in person, that he had always meant to, that he had been certain there would be more Tuesdays. He wrote that he hoped she would use the resources he was leaving to build something that was hers, in the way this house had never quite been hers, and that whatever she built, she should build it knowing that Eli's father had seen him, and known him, and wanted him to have his name. He signed it the way he signed grocery lists and notes about locking the back gate. First name only, no formality, as if the letter were a continuation of a conversation they had started a long time ago and left unfinished by accident. She folded the letter carefully, the way you fold something you are going to keep, and put it back in its envelope and set it on the dresser where she could see it. She sat on the edge of the bed for a while. Outside, the oak trees moved in the wind, the bare March branches making the sound they made when the wind was from the south, a lower sound than north wind, less urgent, more like something breathing. She thought about all the rooms she had entered only to clean, and all the rooms she had been careful not to inhabit, and the 2 years she had spent making herself small in a house where someone had been quietly, and without saying so, trying to make space for her to be larger. She thought about Eli on the chair in the dining room that morning, 2 hands on the armrests, entirely certain. She thought he knew. Not consciously, not in the way adults know things with the apparatus of language and logic and the learned habit of entitlement. In the simpler, more fundamental way of a child who has always been in a room and therefore understands himself as belonging to it. He had never been told the chair was his. He had climbed it because it was there, and he wanted to, and because no one had yet taught him that some chairs were for other people. Maybe that was the thing. Maybe that was what Harrison had been trying to give him. Not the shares, not the legal acknowledgement, but the prior condition. The condition of never having been told he was somewhere he didn't belong. She would make sure he kept that. She stood up and went downstairs. Dominic found her in the garden. She had not expected this. She had expected a lawyer's call, a formal approach, the procedurally correct process of hostile parties communicating through intermediaries. What she had not expected was Dominic Caldwell himself, jacket on despite the cold, walking across the garden toward her in the flat morning light, with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who has not given up and wants her to know it. She was sitting on the low stone bench near the far garden wall, the one Harrison had put in after Eleanor died, under the oak tree that was the oldest thing on the property. Eli was 15 feet away, investigating the dormant flower beds with a stick deeply involved. She stood when she saw him coming. She thought, "Please speak with my attorney." She thought, "I need you to stand." "I'm not going to ask you to sit down," Dominic said, stopping 3 feet from her. The garden was cold and very quiet. "I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to go back inside." She waited. "You were not what I expected," he said. He said it with an evenness that was different from the controlled evenness of the sitting room the evening before. This evenness was less controlled and more simply true. When I first became aware of the situation, I had a version of you in my head, a version that made sense to me." He looked at the garden wall behind her rather than at her. "You are not that version." "I know," she said. "That doesn't change my position," he said. "I know that too." What Harrison did what he thought he was doing. He stopped. Something in his jaw worked. She had seen this before, in other men, the specific quality of someone who has built his entire self-concept on a foundation that is now being re-examined by an external party, and doesn't know what to do with the structural implications. "He should have told me. He should have come to me. I would have—" He stopped again. She waited. "It doesn't matter what I would have done," he said. "He chose not to find out." "He was tired," Clara said. She said it without challenge, without softness, simply as information. He'd spent a long time managing everything alone, including the people who were supposed to be managing things with him. Dominic looked at her then, directly for the first time in this garden, in a way that acknowledged her as the specific person she was, rather than the category of person she represented. "You're not going to take the settlement?" he said. "No," she said. "The petition will take months." "I know. It will be unpleasant." "I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. In the corner of the garden, Eli had found something of great interest near the base of the stone wall, and was crouching down to examine it with his stick. A bug, probably, or a pebble, something small and specific and entirely absorbing. "He has his eyes," Dominic said. It came out differently than she expected, less like a legal acknowledgement, more like a man saying something he did not plan to say, and is not sure, having said it, what to do with. She did not respond. Dominic looked at his nephew, at his brother's son, for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked back across the garden toward the house. She watched him go. She did not know if that was the beginning of something or the end of something. She did not know if Dominic Caldwell was capable of the particular kind of change that situation asked of him. She did not know if he would let Marcus's findings stop the petition, or if he would push it through anyway, out of pride or out of habit, or out of the particular kind of grief that expresses itself as aggression because it does not know any other language. She knew that she had stood in the garden and not moved, and not flinched, and not apologized. She would take that. Eli came back with a pebble, which he presented to her on his upturned palm with the gravity of a significant offering. "Rock," he said. "Rock," she agreed. She took it. It was small and gray and ordinary and very cold. and she held it in her closed hand and felt it warm up. 3 weeks later, Dominic withdrew the petition. He did not do it graciously, or early, or with any of the particular language that would have made things easier. He did it on the last possible business day before the first formal hearing through his attorney in a 3-sentence filing that was notable primarily for what it didn't say. It didn't say he accepted the document's validity. It didn't say he accepted Eli's claim. It said he was withdrawing the petition at this time, a phrase his attorney had probably chosen with great care for how much it preserved the right to try again, while technically ending this particular attempt. The forensic findings had been entered into the court record 2 days before. Marcus called to tell her this on a Tuesday morning, which was not lost on her. "What does the filing mean practically?" she asked. "It means Eli's guardianship is confirmed and the trust is active," Marcus said. "It means Dominic's attempt to use the prior document has been officially set aside, and it means a pause that contained, she thought, a considerable amount of professional satisfaction held very carefully in check. It means the findings about the prior document are now public record. What Dominic or the court chooses to do about that is a separate matter, but it's on record." "Is it over?" she asked. "This phase is over," Marcus said. "The next phases will be different and probably also difficult, though hopefully in smaller ways. Running a trust is not simple. Being a trustee for a majority shareholder in a company of this size is not simple. I would be misleading you if I told you the complicated parts were done." A brief pause. "But the most precarious part, the part where everything could have gone wrong, is done. And it went right." She thanked him. He said he would be in touch about the next steps, and he ended the call. She was in the kitchen. It was 11 in the morning, Tuesday, March. Eli was in the corner of the kitchen with a wooden spoon and a large pot, creating what she privately thought of as his musical career, banging out a rhythm against the pot's copper side with an expression of deep, artistic satisfaction. Rosario was at the counter cutting something, listening to the rhythm without comment. "It went right," Clara said. Not to Rosario, exactly. To the kitchen, to the March light in the window, to the particular smell of this room that was cedar and coffee, and something sweet underneath the combination she had known for 2 years. The smell she had woken to every morning in this house. Rosario looked at her over her shoulder. "Yes," she said. "It did." She found Marcus in the study later that afternoon. She had not asked to meet him there. She had gone to find him about a document he'd mentioned needing her signature, on something routine, one of what was apparently going to be an indefinite series of routine things requiring her signature, and her attention, and her understanding of terms she had not had occasion to understand before. She had brought Eli, who was getting good at this by now, the presence in rooms where important things were happening, the small person at the peripheral edge of large decisions. Eli went immediately to the globe in the corner, which had become his thing in this room over the past weeks. He spun it carefully, with the familiarity of a person returning to something they have decided belongs to their routine. Marcus looked up from the desk. He was in his reading glasses, a pen in his hand. He had the look he always had of someone who had been deciding things for a long time and had made his peace with that. He had been in this house more often in the past 3 weeks than in the prior 2 years combined, and she had found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was used to him. Not comfortable exactly, he was not a person who invited comfort as a first response, but used to him in the specific way you get used to a reliable piece of load-bearing architecture. You stop noticing it because it does its job without requiring your attention. "I heard from Dominic's counsel this morning about the Caldwell Group board schedule," Marcus said. "They've requested a 60-day period before the first board meeting that includes Eli's trustee position. I think that's reasonable. It gives us time to prepare." "Okay," she said. She sat in the chair across the desk, her chair now in this room that was becoming gradually and slightly against her will, hers to navigate. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said. "Harrison told you I was stubborn," she said, "when you were working on the documents." "He did," Marcus said. "Did he say anything else about me? More than what you told me before?" Marcus looked at her over his glasses. He was quiet for a moment, the thinking before speaking quiet, the kind she had come to recognize as meaning something worth waiting for. He said, Marcus said slowly, that you had made him understand something he had spent 60 years not understanding. He said... He stopped. He looked at the desk. He was not, she thought, a man who spoke easily about this kind of thing, which made this harder and truer both at once. He said that you never asked him for anything, and that for most of his life he had taken that as the right arrangement. And then he met you, and he had a son, and he watched you not ask, and he finally understood that it wasn't the right arrangement, it was just the easy one. Marcus looked up. Those were his words, as close as I can remember them. She sat with that for a moment. He was trying to stop being easy, she said. Yes, Marcus said. I believe that's accurate. Eli spun the globe one more time. It slowed and stopped with what seemed in the quiet of the study like the deliberateness of something arriving. I'm going to stay in the house, she said. Not as a question, not as a request, as a statement of fact. The declaration of a decision made. For now, while things are being settled, Eli needs consistency, and this is what's consistent for him. And I know this house. She paused. I know which drawers stick, and where the spare keys are kept, and what the radiators sound like when the heat is coming up. Those things matter. They do, Marcus said. I'm going to need you to explain to me in very small pieces and very slowly everything a trustee is supposed to do, she said. Because I don't know yet, and I'd rather know than not know. That, Marcus said, is the right approach. And I'm going to need you to be patient with how long that takes. I am a patient man, Marcus said. And then, after a pause that had something in it she hadn't heard from him before, a small undercurrent of warmth, contained and professional, but definitely there. Harrison told me that too. He said if anything ever happened to him, and if you found yourself needing someone to answer questions and be patient about the pace of the answers, that you should call me. He said I would be good at it. A pause. He was not always right about things. He was right about that. She looked at him across the desk. This careful, precise man who had carried her son's future in a leather briefcase through the door of a room full of people who had decided it was already over. And she thought that Harrison had been right about a number of things he had not gotten the chance to be right about out loud. Thank you, she said. She meant it as the full thing, not the social reflex. Thank you for all of it, for the 3 weeks, and the folder, and the briefcase, and the patience, and the 40-minute explanation on the evening of the reading, for being the mechanism through which a man who ran out of time managed to say what he meant anyway. Marcus nodded, just once. The nod of a man who understood what was being thanked, and accepted it without requiring it to be made smaller. That evening, after dinner, she let Eli have run of the ground floor. This was not unusual. She had always let him explore freely within the reasonable perimeter of what a toddler could do safely, which was more than most people assumed, and less than he himself believed. He went through the kitchen, the corridor, the sitting room with its large windows and the particular way the evening light pooled in the center of the floor. He went to the formal dining room. She followed, not stopping him. He pushed the door open. He was tall enough now to reach the handle if he stood on his toes, which he did with complete determination, and went in. The room was empty, the table bare, the chairs in their places around the long mahogany. The evening light came through the west-facing windows now, the warm gold of early spring, the light that had been absent from March and was tentatively returning. Eli walked the length of the room without hurrying, which was unusual for him. His usual mode being more purposeful, more aimed. He walked the way someone walks when they are looking at something and deciding about it, his small hands at his sides, his head slightly up. He stopped at the head of the table. He looked at the chair. He put one foot on the crossbar, hands on the armrests, and climbed up and settled himself in, and put his hands flat on the armrests, and looked at the length of the table, stretching away from him toward the west-facing windows and the evening light. Nobody laughed. Clara stood in the doorway and looked at her son in the chair at the head of the table, and she thought about all the mornings in this house, and all the evenings, and all the Tuesday nights with cold coffee, and about what it meant to be in a room and to know yourself as belonging to it without anyone having told you so. And she thought about a letter on a dresser and a pebble in her palm going warm. Eli looked at the windows. He looked at the light. Then he looked at her, with Harrison's eyes and his own face, with the particular quality of seriousness that he had from birth, and he said, "Mama, sit." She crossed the room. She pulled out the chair to his right, not the chair against the wall, not the chair by the door, but the chair immediately to the right of the head of the table, the chair where someone important would sit. And she sat down in it. And the room was quiet, and the light was gold, and Eli looked at the table with the expression of someone who has arrived exactly where he meant to arrive. And Clara Santos sat in the chair to his right and looked at her son. And for the first time in a very long time, she did not make herself smaller. She let herself take up exactly the space she was in. It turned out to be enough. It turned out to be exactly the right amount.